Future Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Hey Futurists, it's me, Katie Aquino, also known as Miss Metaverse, and welcome to the Future Now Show, brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam. We have a great show for you today. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Jerome Glenn, founder and CEO of the Millennium Project, an organization dedicated to global futures research. Hello, Jerome.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
So please, tell us about your organization.
Well, it's a little unusual. It's a think tank, which is not unusual, but we are distributed around the world. We have 55 nodes around the world, and in our way of talking, or our lexicon, a node is a group of individuals and institutions that connect local brains with a global conversation, and then take that global conversation back into translating different languages back into the other countries. So think of a global participatory think tank located around the world with right-wing and left-wing and theist and atheist and government people and artist combination. So it's sort of like a general conversation, like an opera in a sense, of many different kinds of players into an overall performance. And then we put out a State of the Future report each year, and then we hopefully improve that every year. We also put together methodologies, about 39 chapters of methodologies, and update that on an ongoing basis. And we put all this different research together into a global futures system, or global futures intelligence system, that people can take a look at and participate and make comments and so forth. So that's it.
Very interesting. And today's topic is collective intelligence. So do you feel that with everything going around the world that there's a general topic that outstands versus others when it comes to each year and what happens during the year?
Whoa, there's a lot packed into that question there. Let's do the first part. One, collective intelligence is increasingly easy to do in the world because of what we're doing here right now. Internet systems, software systems, crowdsourcing systems, prediction market systems, all these sort of things. More and more strangers are interacting with more strangers and sharing ideas than ever before. They also get polarized into their own groups as well, so it's a two-way street. So the other part of this is because of the knowledge explosion and the complexity of that knowledge and increasing technology as well, these combinations are making it extremely difficult for anybody, decision makers or the general public, to keep track of everything. I mean, Google comes out with a wristwatch, or not Google, but sorry, Apple comes out with a wristwatch. I'm going to be in trouble in Silicon Valley for making that mistake. Anyway, Apple comes out with a wristwatch just the other day. Well, it's all kinds of new features. I mean, there's tons of possibilities, and people will make new applications, and this thing will probably be an interface to the Internet of Things, so that makes it even more complex in an intense world. So how do we keep track of all this sort of stuff? Well, one, we don't. When we go into a big library, we don't have an ambition to know everything at once. We just don't. Because we've grown up with libraries over thousands of years, so we're sort of matured. But we haven't matured about how we handle this information explosion in internet yet. So collective intelligence systems and software, one of which we've done ourselves, is a way to bring together massive amounts of information, but in an organized fashion that people can see pieces and how the pieces fit to the whole, comment about that, and evolve with it. So in a sense, it's a little bit of an information overload defense system. How can you handle all that stuff while at the same time trying to keep up with that stuff? Because a lot of people just say, hey, forget it, it's too much, I'm out of here.
Right, definitely. So being that you study this collective intelligence, what topics do you feel are the most important, just generally, in the world right now?
Good. This is my favorite question to fight back on. We have this problem of saying, what is the most important? Or what is the number one? Because it's an easy question to ask. And it is not doing us a service. For example, if you were studying the human body, you would not accept the question, what is the most important system? Is the most important system the nervous system? Or is it the respiratory system? or a circulatory system or endocrine system, very quickly you say, no, 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 no. All of those systems give us a framework for understanding the human body, and all of those systems are 100% necessary. You take any of those systems out, and you're dead. We have to get over this idea, and it's going to be tough to get over this idea of what's the key thing, what's the number one. It's easy to do that, but it's not doing us a service, because you get people who say, well, water is the number one problem in the world. You can't survive without water within a few days. You can survive without food for a month, but not water. Water is the most important thing. Water tables are falling around the world. Watersheds are controlled by 2 or more countries. It's a perpetual war. That's it. Then the energy people come in and say, no, 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 no. You give me enough energy and I'll solve your water problem. Then somebody else says, no, no, no. The energy is not the problem. It's the environment problem, because you guys are screwing up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The truth is there's a whole array of challenges. We've identified 15. Others can have a different list. But this array of 15 is what one should understand. And it's not that hard to understand the basics of it, in the same way that in school, when you were in elementary school and high school, you learned the basics of the human body. You did it. You learned it. You know these things. I mean, most people know these things. We have to take that kind of an attitude, that holistic approach, the Bucky Fuller type approach, etc., to the world. And breaking it up into pieces and saying this piece is more important than that piece just gets into an argument. And then you bring people on a show like this, they argue what's the most important, then the show's over and people go on about their fractalized separate businesses. Not a good idea.
So what do you feel, well, actually, I wanted to ask you, do your reports cover all of these topics, or
Yeah.
do they
Yes.
do? Oh, that's great.
Yeah, what we do, to make it reasonable for human beings, what we do is we give a short overview of each 15 challenges. So like it's a page or so, a little over. And then a little section on so what for Latin America, so what for Africa. So you break it down a little bit. And then if people want the more detailed, they can go on to the online system, and each of the 15 gets several hundred pages. So you're looking at a very massive amount of information. But you keyword search and go through what you want. But you skim across the surface. And even if that skimming across the surface is still too much, then we also have what we call a situation chart. What's the current situation on water? What's the desired situation on water? What are the policies to address the situation of water? So it's very precise, like a briefing. So one can click through in our system, can click through each of these challenges very quickly and see the current situation across the world, and they just come back once a month and they get an update. And if you get used to doing this, you get a feeling for the whole world.
It's a continuous updating of this knowledge with all the world problems.
That's right.
Classified into these 15 different main challenges, and that's what your reports present.
Yeah.
I really like that. I really do. I actually wanted to ask you, because I really like your personality. I really think that you have some really great stuff. And I want to know what you think about all this talk lately about our jobs being automated by artificial intelligence and robotics. What do you think about that?
I think it's an extremely important issue, and the world has got to come together and think about this, because it's not going to be one answer that this solves the problem, of course. My own so far reading of the literature on this, I find that one, if we continue as we're going and give speeches but don't do anything, then 50% or so unemployment is plausible by 2050. And the income gap will be far worse than we see today. It doesn't mean that's going to happen, but that's the current direction, which is a prescription for world civil wars and revolutions on an ongoing basis. And as technology gets more sophisticated, both good and bad, individuals will be able to use weapons of mass destruction. Now that's a pretty scary thing. Now, that doesn't have to happen at all. There's a lot of things we can do in education to get ahead of this. We can create our collective intelligence systems to get ahead of this. We can innovate, and we can invest research into new forms of innovation and so forth, and new kinds of jobs. Like, for example, you are doing something in the world that wasn't possible a little while ago. You're inventing your career. The idea of inventing a career is sort of a new idea. And we're not teaching people that they are surrounded by, right now, 40% of humanity. Well, that's a
Right.
pretty big market. So if you can only get 0.00000001 of that market for what you're interested in, you can make a good living.
I do. I think
But
it's all about the education. I think it's about reinventing yourself. We all have to work together definitely to create our own future. And that's exactly what the Future Now show is about. We're talking about how we can make this change.
And this is going to be important because the whole idea of the future's thrust of technology is to cut out all the nonsense. Well, if we cut out all the nonsense, then guess what? We get to make sense of a new civilization. Like, if it only takes 50% of the world to make civilization work in 2050, it'll probably won't even take that much, but how much of civilization is necessary to make civilization worthwhile?
Right.
Oh, that's a much different question. How do we make civilization worthwhile? How do we create a better civilization? How many different people do you need for that? That's a whole other orientation, and we want to do a study on that, and we want to do 3 different scenarios, and it will probably change, but right now the idea is to do 3 different scenarios. We're doing literature search, we want to do a survey around the world and all that sort of stuff, then take all that and make some scenarios. One might be business as usual, what's the disaster? Because sometimes you got to catch people's attention to say, yes, you have to do something. There's no reason to have policy if everything's going fine. The purpose of policy is to change the future. So if that future is not acceptable, then we do have to have new policies, new approaches. The second one is, what are they? How does that turn out? But, and a third one might be, we may have to make really cultural changes, economic changes. Like we have, for example, right now, you're using the means of production, which is internet. Nobody owns it. Nobody owns it. Karl Marx, remember Karl Marx and Adam Smith and all these guys that they say, either the state's got to own it, or the public's got to own it, or private investors got to own it. Right now, the biggest medium for future production, means of production, is the internet. No one owns it. Non-ownership is a new concept. So then we have open source and open things that you make your money off the application, and you give back that application to make others smarter who then do it to you. That's a different way of doing economics. We have not trained the world to think like this. So we can make a fabulous future, but we have to get serious about this. And what we want to do is take these results out of these scenarios and share that with the 55 nodes around the world. They then have workshops in cooperation with their governments and universities and businesses where it says, okay, what do we do in Bulgaria? What do we do in Peru, etc., so that we engage the world in a face-to-face interaction with the data and the research and so forth. Because it's going to have to be massive things like this to make the difference, or we're heading for a serious problem.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Jerome. I really love speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Future Now show. And so let's go, and we're going to build a better world. Yes.
Excellent. Let's do it. All right. Take care.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.